from Raghav's Diagnostic and Research Center, Bangalore. She has keen interest in fetal imaging and therapy and is currently a consultant at Srinivasa Ultrasound Scanning Center, Bangalore. She inherits the skill and knack of obstetric imaging from none other than the famous Dr. Ramamurthy sir. Without taking any further time, I would hand over the session to Dr. Rachita. Hi, Rachita, are you there?
Hi, hi.
Thanks for accepting the invite on a short notice and doing this for the REF and Cafe Rengen platform.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me and thank you for making me a part of this wonderful program. I mean, REF has been a part of my education in radiology since I was a postgraduate. So it's lovely to come back as a speaker and love so many of y'all logging in on a Saturday evening.
Yeah, I'm sure the numbers is going to increase as the word spreads around. Can you just share your screen, please?
Yes.
Oh, yes, we look all set to begin.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. So basically, when Dr. Rajas approached me for the fetal medicine topics on the REF platform, he told me we're going to have talks on NT and mid-trimester anomaly scan and the third trimester, etc. But he wanted me to specifically do the talk on do's and don'ts in obstetric ultrasound. This is going to be a talk which is going to span all 3 trimesters of pregnancy. Some basics we're going to touch upon, something that all of us, I'm sure, are doing on a day-to-day basis. So nothing that's going to be extremely new or is something that you've not heard of, but things that we have to get right, fundamentals, basics that we should not be faltering in our day-to-day practice. These certain small basics, if we get them right, the rest of our practice is going to be extremely easy because all our reports, everything is based on these few fundamental factors. So when he told me he wants me to do this topic, he said, I think it's important for even if you're a beginner, even if you're a postgraduate, even if you've been doing fetal medicine, ultrasound, obstetric ultrasounds for quite a few years, this is something that we should refresh and try and get our a uniform sort of protocol that we follow anywhere on earth. So let's start off with the do's and don'ts. I'd start off by saying that obstetric ultrasound is complex, it's multifaceted, it's challenging. Definitely it's challenging, and it's ever changing, and it is technically difficult. I know there's a lot of aspects to obstetric ultrasound that it's not as easy as scanning an adult, or it's not as easy as scanning a thyroid or a venous Doppler or anything like that. I was just talking to a friend a few days ago, and it's so technically difficult, obstetric ultrasound, because our patients, the fetuses, are ever moving, right? They're in different positions. They're not going to lie down and pose in the position that we want. So my friend, a very good friend, is a surgeon. So I was telling her that only difference between my job and your job is your patients are still when you're working and mine are moving and they're not cooperating and they're not in the position that we want. So definitely obstetric ultrasound is technically difficult, but also it's very rewarding and very satisfying. That's another difference. For us, most of the times, the news we give the patients it's good news, it's reassuring, you get that instant gratification, and it's a very rewarding subspecialty. So I absolutely love it. So when such a huge complex task is in our hands, we must know that it's a huge onus and a great responsibility for us to deliver the correct care to the unborn child. We are our patients, our fetuses that have no voice of their own. We are the ones who are deciding their fate in eventuality. What we say on our reports is going to decide their fate. So we have to be extremely careful about what we see and what we say. So to see, what do we see, why do we see it, and how do we see it is important. And to say, if we've seen something, what do we say about it? why should we say something about it, and how do we phrase it correctly in our reports to get the right message across. So these are the things I'll be touching upon, and we'll see in different categories how we go about it. So coming first to dating and biometry. So we need to understand that dating and biometry are not the same thing. Dating a pregnancy is to do with the age of the fetus. We are trying to ascertain how old this fetus is. We are trying to see by measuring the fetus how old this fetus could be. So that is age. Biometry is we're trying to see how large the fetus is, the size of the fetus. So the age and size, of course, are interrelated, but a purpose for each scan varies. Are we looking to date? Are we looking to ascertain the age? Or have we already ascertained the age? And are we trying to see whether the fetus is growing according to that age or not? So when we take the first scan, the earliest scan around 8 weeks, 6.5 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 to 9 weeks, that is called the dating scan. Okay, and that is where we're ascertaining the age of the fetus. So the earliest dating scan with a CRL, when you see the fetal node and you can measure the CRL, that dating scan is the best to ascertain the age. So the ideal dating scan is around 6 to 10 weeks when you're seeing the fetal node clearly and you can place your calipers well and get a nice size of the fetus. There, because the fetus is so small, the size of the fetus is going to correlate well with the age of the fetus. So that's why the earliest dating scan with the CRL holds. And especially if you can do a transvaginal ultrasound, that will give you a much more accurate measurement of the CRL than the transabdominal approach. So always try and do a transvaginal good dating scan because that is going to hold for the rest of the pregnancy. So ideally 6 to 10 weeks, but if we miss that window, the next best window to measure CRL is between 11 and 14 weeks, which is our traditional NT scan period, the first trimester NT scan period. So there also the CRL is a good correlation with the size and we can use that. So up to 13 weeks, 6 days, or up to 14 weeks, the gestational age dating is done based on CRL alone. We're not going to include BPD, HC, AC, or FL in the first trimester. And even earlier, 6 to 10 weeks, we're not going to include the sac size. If we're seeing a sac without a fetal node, we're just going to say the fetal node has not yet appeared. So maybe this pregnancy is around 4 to 5 weeks. We're going to wait for the CRL to appear. We're going to wait for the fetal node to appear. But we aren't going to date the pregnancy based on the sac size. Once the CRL is seen, we're taking only the CRL. We're going to forget about the sac size. That is no longer relevant in the respect to dating the pregnancy. So that's how we fix the gestational age in the first scan. And then once the gestational age is fixed in the first scan, for the rest of the pregnancy, we're going to depend on that same date. If the CRL gestational age is correlating with the menstrual age, meaning the difference in size is less than 7 days, then we're going to stick to menstrual age. We're going to take her LMP and say for the rest of the pregnancy, we're going to use your LMP to see how the baby grows. But if the difference is more than 7 days, then we're going to redate the pregnancy based on that first dating scan. So say suppose the CRL, the fetal node has appeared late. It's a delayed conception. So the first scan you do around 6 weeks, you expect to see a CRL, but you don't see the fetal node. You're going to call her back a week later, 2 weeks later, and then she comes back and then you start getting a CRL. So that's the age we're going to set. And from then on, the EDD that you assign in that first dating scan with the CRL, that is going to be fixed for the rest of pregnancy. So that it happens in a natural conception. All of this period date, LMP, the first date of the last period, correlating the dating scan with the LMP, all of that applies only for natural pregnancies, natural conceptions, where we can't be very sure of the date of conception as it's a natural pregnancy. But when you come to an IVF, in vitro fertilization, we know that the date of conception is known. We know when the embryo transfer was done. So the date of conception usually is a few days before the embryo transfer. If it's a frozen embryo, doesn't matter. The embryo is going to be frozen at day 3 or day 5. And so the number of days, the age of the embryo, if you minus that from the embryo transfer date, you're going to get the date of conception. So suppose the embryo transfer date was 15th of March 2024. And it was a day 5 embryo that was transferred. So the date of conception will be 15 minus 5, which will be around 10th of March 2024. So then you use that date of conception, enter it in the machine where you have options to enter LMP, options to enter date of conception or EDD. Any one of these, only one of these we need to enter per scan. So before we start off any scan, we need to enter these details. So you either choose the LMP or the date of conception or the EDD. So in an IVF pregnancy, I'm going to choose the date of conception because that is known. We know the age of this fetus. So we're going to enter the date of conception, carry on the scan from then onwards. Menstrual age will always be date of conceptual age plus 2 weeks. So that is irrelevant. If you enter the date of conception in your machine, the machine knows that the menstrual age will be calculated from date of conception. So that is another very important thing to note. When it comes to IVF pregnancies, no need to ask for the last period date, no need to ask for any other menstrual history, were your cycles regular, irregular, nothing. We just need to use the embryo transfer date and the age of the embryo to get the date of conception. So when it comes back to a natural conception, we sometimes will have to get the menstrual history of the lady because you enter the LMP, you're getting a certain gestational age from her LMP, but the scan size is not matching with the LMP. Then you ask her if her cycles were regular, were they 28, 30 days once, was the cycles before this current pregnancy regular, and also ask her to give you the first date of the last period. Most often, women, when you ask them when was your LMP, they're going to give the date of the missed period. We don't want that. Missed period, you can't know the date. She didn't have that period, so there's no way she can tell you that date. We have to be very clear to say, when did you last get your cycle? The last cycle, the first day, you give me that date. So recheck that, and then sometimes it might match. And if it still doesn't, you redate according to the first dating scan. So you may not have done the first dating scan. She may have come to you for the first time in the mid-trimester. She may come to you for the first time in the third trimester. She may have gotten her previous scans done elsewhere. So when that is the case, you need to manually pull out all her previous scans, ask her to pull out her file, see all the previous reports, see what they were correlating with, see when the first dating scan was. Is it a good scan? Look at the pictures. Was it a transvaginal scan? Was it a transabdominal scan? Was the picture of the CRL taken correctly? Was the measurement calipers placement taken correctly? Did they give the gestational age based on that CRL? And then see what the difference is, and then take that as your basis of dating if it's not matching with the period date. So whenever I start a scan, before I even touch the probe or touch the patient, this exercise I have to go through. Look through all her previous reports, see if I have myself done the scans or somebody else has done the scans, look at the pictures, take a piece of paper, her case sheet, for example, chalk out a little bit of a rough exercise to see whether the dates were matching with her first dating scan, and then only proceed. Once you know the age of the fetus properly, then you can start measuring the fetus. Don't do the scan first and then try and figure out what the age is. And lastly, extremely important, please do not quote a fresh EDD in every single scan report beyond the first dating scan period. If she's coming to you for the NT scan, for the mid-trimester scan, the size of the fetus is going to keep changing. It's not going to, grow like clockwork, exactly matching the age that you have fixed. So even if it varies by 3-4 days a week or 2 weeks, we're not going to change the EDD. The EDD, that means the expected date of delivery, is fixed on the age of the fetus. 40 weeks of age of fetus, that is fixed. None of us can change the age once it is fixed. We're only saying whether the size of the fetus correlates with its age. So it's not like every scan we do, we're going to give it a new birth date. We can't. The EDD is fixed, only the size changes. Each report beyond the mid trimester, we're going to say if the growth of the fetus is appropriate for the age already ascertained. For that fixed EDD, is the growth matching or the growth is not matching? Is there a lack of growth, 1 week less, 2 weeks less? Is the weight falling below the 10th centile to call it a growth restriction or small for gestational age? Fixed on the age, or is it a larger for gestational age? Baby, is the size larger? Is the weight larger? We're going to correlate it with one fixed EDD. So please make sure that you're not giving a fresh EDD in every single scan report. So once we know how to fix the age of the baby, then we're going to come to the biometry, measuring the biometric parameters of the fetus. So this we're going to start doing after 14 weeks. Up to 13 weeks, 6 days, it is only the crown rump length that is important. Beyond 14 weeks, we're going to take the head circumference, BPD, biparietal diameter, abdominal circumference, and the femur length. And based on these 4 parameters, the software on the machine is going to calculate a approximate estimated fetal weight, EFW, and then that's going to have a percentile, and we're going to see if whether this size of the fetus is matching with the age. So whenever we start measuring the biometric parameters, all 4 measurements, please take the biometric measurements as per the guidelines. What I follow usually is the ISWOG guidelines, the International Society of Ultrasound and Obstetrics and Gynecology. They're a huge body of very, very expert fetal medicine practitioners who have come up with these guidelines after years of fine-tuning how each measurement must be taken. These guidelines are freely available on the net. You just have to Google ISWOG guidelines. You're going to get guidelines for the first trimester, for the mid trimester, for the third trimester, etc. And in each of the guidelines, they're going to tell you how to measure each parameter. So how do you exactly take the biparietal diameter? Now they say you have to take it from the outer surface of the near calvarium to the outer surface of the far calvarium. But you can also take it from outer surface to inner surface, outer to inner. So as long as your the charts, the graphs that are fed into your machine matches the method you're taking, that's fine. Head circumference has to be only on the bony outline of this calvarium, not including the scalp and the soft tissue around the bone. So it's only the bony calvarium head circumference. Femur length, the longest diaphyseal length, not including the metaphyses or the epiphyses. That's how you take the femur length, make the femur as horizontal as possible, even the cranium as horizontally as possible so that the hemispheric fissure is as horizontal to the beam as possible. And then, of course, the abdominal circumference, there you keep the spine at 3 o'clock or 6 or 9 o'clock position, and you take the abdominal circumference, including the skin and subcutaneous tissue. So that's the difference between head circumference and abdominal circumference. I'm sure all of you know this. You can go through the guidelines if you want to refresh your basics again on those aspects, but make sure you're sticking to the guidelines so that your interpretation of these biometric parameters is correct based on the charts. So each of these guidelines, each of these parameters, if you have a doubt, say suppose you're getting a head circumference that is a little small, don't try and adjust the calipers to try and fit the measurements into the normal category. It's very easy human tendency to kind of stretch the endpoints a little bit to get slightly larger measurements so that our measurement fits into the normal category. But don't. If you have a doubt, defreeze the image, obtain the section again. Start off from scratch, get a nice section again, and measure it again on a fresh image by sticking to the guidelines. Don't try and stretch or squeeze in the same image to try and get it into the normal range. And how do we interpret these measurements? We're always going to use nomograms or charts. These nomograms or charts are fed into our machines. Most of our machines have these nomograms and charts. If they're not activated, please call up your application specialist, whoever's the company specialist of your ultrasound machine, ask them to add these charts or nomograms, or at least activate them if they've already added, so that as soon as you measure the biparietal diameter, the head circumference, automatically the machine should give you a chart that will tell you whether this measurement is in the normal range for gestational age or not. So what these nomograms give is called a percentile. A percentile is a description or a correlation of the absolute biometric parameter based on the gestational age. So for all four parameters, BPD, HC, AC, and FL, the normal percentile range is 5th centile to 95th centile. Anything less than the 5th centile is too small. Anything above 95th centile is too large. So to know which is the 5th centile and 95th centile for each gestational age, we are not going to remember. I don't know for 18 weeks what is the 5th centile female length. For 19 weeks, what is the 95th centile head circumference? I don't know that. So I need to use the nomograms. So once you get the nomograms, you see on the nomograms itself, this is how the nomograms are seen on your machines. That's the BPD, HC, AC, and FL. Once you take the measurements, open the worksheet or the graph sheet, and you'll automatically start getting these graphs. So if your current measurement today falls between 5th centile, which is the lower line, 95th centile, which is the upper line, if that dot is anywhere between that range, it is normal. So it's an easy graphical representation. In one shot, I know that all these four measurements are in the normal range. You can also see in the worksheet, you get a list of the measurements, and you get two columns over here. This vertical column is the percentiles, and this vertical column is approximately what that measurement correlates to which gestational age. This last column I'm not interested in at all, because I don't want to know the age of the BPD or the age of the HC or the age of the AC. This I already know. Age I have already set by the LMP over here. This lady had good regular cycles. Her dating scan was matching well with her menstrual age. So I have stuck to her LMP. I've entered her LMP. And I already know that the age of the baby today, the scan day that I'm doing, the age is already fixed at 35 weeks. I don't need to know each of these parameters correlates with what age. Doesn't mean the BPD is 34 weeks, means the biparietal diameter came 1 week later than the fetus. The head circumference came 3 days earlier than the fetus. Abdominal circumference was 5 weeks later. No, of course, the entire fetus is the same age. It is 35 weeks. So this column, please don't put it in your report. Don't mention it in your report at all. What is important is this column. For my measurement of 8.4 centimeters of BPD, the measurement is at a 23rd centile for the gestational age. The head circumference is at 25th centile for gestational age. So that those two are normal. It's above 5, below 95. Those two are normal. You can even see it over here in the bar graph. But the abdominal circumference, and I've repeated the abdominal circumference twice just to make sure that my measurement is right. There was only a 0.2 millimeter difference. So I know my measurements have been right. So abdominal circumference is less than 1st centile for the gestational age of 35 weeks. This is no longer in the normal range. It is less than 5th centile. So this is going to be worrisome. And also the femur length is also less than 5th centile at 1.5 or 2nd centile. So the same thing is represented on the graph.
Recording in progress.
That I am more interested in. So once I know these values, I know that the head has grown appropriately for gestational age, but the abdominal size, the femur have lagged. There is a growth lag when it comes to the abdominal circumference and the femur length. And that is represented on this graph. The abdominal circumference, this dot is less than the 5th centile. Femur length, it's also less than the 5th centile. So when I come and see this picture, what am I thinking of? Overall, I need to see the weight. Is it falling into the growth restricted category or not? For that, I look at the estimated fetal weight. It's about 1.76 kg. And when I see the percentile for the fetal weight, that is also less than the 10th centile. For EFW fetal weight, the percentile range, normal range is 10 to 90, not 5 to 95 as the other parameters, but for weight, it is 10 to 90. So anything less than the 10 centile fetal weight is going to be abnormally less. So I'm going to start thinking of a growth restricted fetus over here, meaning because the weight is that less, I need to see whether this fetus is growth restricted. So for that, I'm also going to look at the previous scans. I myself have done 3 scans for her. That was the first scan at around 16 weeks. Second scan was around 21 weeks. And today's scan was 35 weeks. So the growth has actually dropped. The HC and BPD have maintained, but the abdominal circumference, it is a falling trend. If you connect these 3 dots, the line is no longer parallel to the nomogram. It is cutting across and falling down. So that is a falling trend. The female length also is a falling trend. So when you have a falling trend like this, where it cuts across the graph, then you are going to think of intrauterine growth restriction. And then to add on to your diagnosis, to be sure that it could be an intrauterine growth restriction, you add on Dopplers. And when I did the Dopplers for this fetus, umbilical artery was in the normal range, MCAPI was less than 5th centile, and ductus venosus was lesser than 5th centile, which is not a problem, that's normal, but MCA should be higher the better. Umbilical artery, lower the better. Ductus venosus, lower the better. Uterine artery, lower the better. So only MCA, we want high resistance flow. But in this case, the fetus had a low resistance flow. MCA Doppler PI was less than the 5th centile. So this is again pointing to hypoxia. So putting this entire picture together, I'm going to diagnose a case of intrauterine growth restriction, or FGR, fetal growth restriction for this case. And how do I report it? I'm going to say a fetus of age 35 weeks. In my impression in the report, it will say age of the fetus is 35 weeks, ascertained by the menstrual age, meaning LMP of so-and-so. That is the age. For such an age, the size of the fetus is about 3 weeks lesser. The average ultrasound age, or the average ultrasound size, that is about 2 to 3 weeks lesser than the age. And more importantly, the fetal weight is less than 10th centile for gestational age. And hence, I am suspecting fetal growth restriction. And adding on the Dopplers, there are signs of hypoxia. So the entire report is going to be a 35 weeks live fetus with growth restriction of fetal weight less than 10th centile and Doppler changes showing us fetal hypoxia. That's how we're going to put it in our reports. I'm not going to say 32 weeks, 6 days sized fetus in the report impression and leave it. Nobody's going to know if that size is correct for the age or not. This is not important. This age is important. The weight percentile is important. And your interpretation of this size. Is the fetus appropriately growing for gestational age, or is it growth restricted small for gestational age, or is it large for gestational age? That is the interpretation that you need to put in your final impression of the report. So please use nomograms, plot the growth curves, take a printout of these graphs, take a printout of the estimated fetal weight as well, attach it to the report and send the patient off with the picture so that anybody anywhere, including the referring doctor, knows that, at one shot, they know what is happening to the growth. So once there is a problem with the growth, depending on how severe the growth restriction is, I'll want to follow up this case to see how the growth is progressing. Today, I've seen that the fetal size is a little smaller, the weight is a little lesser than the normal range. I want to maintain a chart to see how it's going to progress in the future. So when I want to repeat the growth scan, I need to wait at least for a 2-week interval. There's no point in repeating a scan 1 week later, 6 days later, 10 days later. You're not going to see that much of an improvement in growth in such a short period of time. And when you see your graph, if your next scan dot is so close to your previous scan dot, You're not even going to make out the difference. So please leave at least 2 weeks of time gap between today and the next scan to see whether the trend is a stable trend. Is it improving in biometry, or is it further reducing in the biometry? So that's another important point. Stick to one set of nomograms. In your entire practice, you can choose which charts you want to use to put in your reports. Most of us use charts by Hadlock. So when you open your machine, it's going to give you multiple choices. See over here. If you come here, it'll tell you each of these parameters are based on which charts. So most of us use Hadlock measurements like this. It's going to mention it over here. So that I feel works very well for all the biometric parameters, including the weight. So I'm very happy with Hadlock. You can use, if you want, our own Indian charts. A lot of our very senior doctors have come up with Indian nomograms. You can use those. You can use some other nomograms you want that are suited for your country or your area of practice, but stick to the same nomograms throughout your practice, and especially for the same patient. Please don't change the type of nomograms you use in between the patient. Say, suppose I'm doing this scan over here and I'm finding abdominal circumference is less, femur length is less. Oh, okay, let me change from Hadlock to the Indian charts and let me see if all of this comes to normal. No, I can't do that. Just we can't change the charts just to make the percentiles normal. From the beginning for her, for all three studies, I've stuck to Hadlock. So even today, even though the percentiles are less, I'm going to stick to Hadlock because then only I can interpret whether the growth is stable, or is it a falling trend, or is it an improving trend. So please stick to the same charts and report that as such in your reports. For each parameter, report the centiles alone, not the gestational age, only the centiles. Okay. Always correlate the growth with age. You can call it the 50th centile size. So suppose I've seen the same fetus at 35 weeks. All the measurements are coming in the normal range, and the average ultrasound age is about 34 weeks, 4 days. That's only a 3-day difference. 35 weeks minus 34 weeks, 4 days is only 3 days. I'm happy with that. 7 days this way or that way, we are not going to be bothered. So I'm going to say that this fetus has grown appropriate for gestational age. But in this case, it was a difference of 2 weeks, 1 day. 35 weeks minus 32 weeks, 6 days is 2 weeks, 1 day. That's a significant difference, more than 7 days. And also the weight is less than 10 centile. So this I'm going to say as this fetus is smaller for gestational age. It's not growing appropriately. There is a lag. It is a fetal growth restriction. That's how. So coming to the next set of do's and don'ts, I've completed the two most important, I think the most basic things that you can should not go wrong: dating and biometry. I hope we're all very clear on those aspects now. We'll next move on to aneuploidy screening. Aneuploidy screening is basically screening for markers, soft markers on ultrasound. These markers are seen in the first trimester in the NT scan period. We look at the nuchal translucency, the nasal bone ossification, tricuspid regurgitation, and the ductus venosus Dopplers, A wave of the ductus venosus in the first trimester. That I'm sure Dr. Rajas is going to cover in his next talk. So those are the first trimester markers. In the second trimester, we have a longer list. We have nuchal fold thickness, nasal bone length. We have the lateral ventricular sizes, transverse diameter of the lateral ventricles. We have the humerus length, the femur length that have to be above 5th centile. We look at the echogenic intracardiac focus if it's present or not, pelviectasia if it's present or not, aberrant right subclavian artery, clinodactyly, sandal gap. All of those are markers in the second trimester. So that means up to 22, 23 weeks. I wouldn't measure the nuchal fold beyond 23 weeks because as the fetus grows, the nuchal fold is also going to keep thickening and thickening. So in my practice, at least I've noticed beyond 23 weeks, most of the nuchal folds will be thicker than 6 millimeter, which is the cutoff. 6 millimeter or lesser is a normal nuchal fold. So beyond 23 weeks, it will cross 6 millimeters. So I'm not going to include it in my aneuploidy screening beyond 23 weeks. Up to 23 weeks, you can do all your markers, get a nice screening done. So when we do markers, we're going to look at the presence of the marker or the absence of the marker. Is the marker positive or negative? And once you find the list of markers, you've seen which are positive, which are negative. It's not enough to just say this fetus has an echogenic intracardiac focus. This fetus has a hypoplastic nasal bone. This fetus has a pelviectasia, and then send the lady off. That's not going to make any sense. With those markers, we next need to calculate the risk. How do we calculate the risk? Again, Dr. Rajas will take you in his next talk. We need to know the a priori risk. What was the background risk of this lady when she came for the scan? Was it based on her age? Was it based on some biochemical screening? Take that as your starting base risk. And on top of that risk, you add these markers, the likelihood ratios, and calculate the fresh risk. There are a lot of softwares available for this. There are free softwares, in fact, available online on perinatology.com or the FMF website. You can use those calculators to enter the background risk, enter which of the markers are positive in today's scan and which of the markers are negative. It'll give you a new calculated risk. Based on that new risk, you need to put that new risk in your report. Mention as this lady came to me for a mid-trimester anomaly scan. She's got a good NT scan done. She's got a good biochemical screening, double marker with a combined screening of NT. Her risk after NT was 1 in 6,400. That was her risk when she came to me today for Down syndrome mid-trimester screening. I do all my markers today, and I have found that there is an echogenic intracardiac focus. All the other markers are negative. Okay, so I'm going to state in my report the background risk of this lady or the combined screening risk of this lady was 1 in 6,400. Today's scan reveals an echogenic intracardiac focus, which is a weak marker. It has a likelihood ratio of 1, meaning it's not going to increase the risk, but it's not going to decrease the risk either. So since I have seen an echogenic intracardiac focus, I am keeping this risk unaltered. So the same 1 in 6,400 risk for Down syndrome is going to continue for her. So that is what I'm going to state in my report. And I also have to interpret this result. So the 1 in 6,400 is in the low risk range. So I'm going to say 1 in 6,400 chances of Down syndrome dash low risk. That is going to be a complete scan. Until you do all of these steps, there's no point in doing aneuploidy screening. Please make sure you're assessing the markers, calculating the risk, mentioning the risk in your report, interpreting what that risk is. Is it low risk? Is it intermediate risk? Is it high risk? And once you interpret it, then suggest what is required to be done based on that interpretation. If it is in the low risk, I'm not going to suggest any other further tests. If it falls in the intermediate risks, 1 in 100 to 1 in 1,000 range, then I'm going to suggest a NIPT, non-invasive prenatal test. Or if it falls in the high risk category, less than 1 in 100, then I'm going to suggest a direct invasive test to see the chromosomes directly, and that's a definitive test. So that's how you interpret and suggest for your next step. So that's a long procedure. It is going to take a few extra minutes, but unless you spend that time and give that complete report, you're not going to be doing a good aneuploidy screening. So always do that. And then also remember, it's a sequential risk assessment. That's why you always have to check the previous scan reports and lab reports. She's coming to you at 20 weeks. So I'm not going to jump to her age. If the lady has, a age of 35 years, I'm not going to say the maternal age 35 years. So a background risk is based on the age today. No, I'm going to check if her NT scan was done, check if her double marker test was done, see what was the risk assessment at the end of those tests, and take that final risk as today's starting point, and then manipulate that risk with today's markers. So always a sequential risk assessment. So if you don't check the previous scan reports, you're going to miss out on using that important information. And another extremely important point to note, if an NIPT has been done earlier, then there's no role for further screening today. If she's gotten an NIPT done at her 11th week, 12th week, before the NT scan itself, then when she comes for her NT scan, I'm going to measure the NT, because the NT is not just a marker for Down syndrome, it's also a marker for cardiac anomalies, rasopathies, etc. So I will measure the NT, but I'm not going to bother giving a risk figure for Down syndrome, because an NIPT is a much stronger screening test than any of our ultrasound screening markers. So once an NIPT has said that it is low risk for Down syndrome, I'm not going to dig around and try and find any other soft markers in my scan to see if I need to raise doubts again. No, the doubt has been cleared, NIPT is low risk, forget about Down syndrome. Similarly, if she's coming to me in the mid trimester, and if her NIPT was done earlier, I'm not going to bother about looking for the length of the nasal bone. Is there an echogenic focus or not? Pelviectasia, nothing. Even if I see an echogenic focus, I'm not going to even mention it, because an echogenic focus in the heart has no other relevance than being a soft marker for Downs. So don't even have to bother mentioning it. There's a pelviectasia of about 5-6 millimeters. I will mention it in the sense that I need to monitor it to see whether it's going to be stable or is it progressing into an obstructive renal pathology. So in that sense, I will mention it, but not in the sense of aneuploidy screening. I'm not going to bother measuring the nuchal fold, the nasal bone. I don't even need to look for aberrant right subclavian artery, in fact. So none of these are important anymore. But few others, like the lateral ventricles, of course, we're going to measure in every case. Those are markers that are not just for Downs, but they are for a wide other variety of disorders. Those you will keep in mind. So please make sure that no other Downs markers are seen after an NIPT has been done. And another very important point, don't repeat the same marker in subsequent scans. If she's come to you for an early anomaly scan at 16 weeks, you've seen that the nasal bone is hypoplastic for 16 weeks. You measure it, you say that this nasal bone measurement is less than 2.5 centile for gestational age. Calculate the risk. The risk is falling into either the intermediate risk or the high risk category. Nasal bone is a very, very strong marker. The likelihood ratio for the nasal bone is 6.5, isolated likelihood ratio. You can get all of these from an article, a meta-analysis, in fact, by Agatha Clears et al. It's again a freely available article of the White Journal, ISWOG journal. Just Google a meta-analysis for mid-trimester markers, Agatha Clears, and you'll get this table. It'll give you likelihood factors for each isolated marker, and then you can use those. For a nasal bone, hypoplastic or unossified, non-ossified, it is a very strong likelihood ratio, 6.56. What does that mean? If a fetus has a non-ossified nasal bone or a hypoplastic nasal bone, it is 6.5 times more likely to have Down syndrome than a fetus that has a normal nasal bone. So that is a very, very strong marker. So say suppose she's come to me at 16 weeks, that fetus has a hypoplastic nasal bone. I've calculated the risk. It's come as high risk. I'm going to suggest the next step is an invasive testing to rule out Down syndrome. There's no point in saying, please come back 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later or come back in the 5th month. We'll see how this nasal bone is growing. If it has grown normally, you can forget about it. No, that's wrong. Do not repeat the same marker in a subsequent scan. If today you're sure about a marker, report it. Ask for a test that is higher than that screening test. Based on your risk calculation, either suggest an NIPT or a definitive invasive test. But there's no role for waiting and watching. The only exception to that rule is if she's come for a very early NT scan at around 11 to 12 weeks, then by 11 to 12 weeks, I don't expect the nasal bone to be ossified. Ossification normally starts after 12 weeks. So if I'm seeing her at 11 weeks, if I'm seeing the fetus at 11 weeks, then I can say, please come back 1.5 or 2 weeks later to see if the nasal bone has ossified. That's the only exception to the rule. Otherwise, all other markers, you see it today, interpret it today, and suggest a test better than what we are doing on scan. A better test meaning better sensitivity, better specificity. It could be an NIPT, or if you want a definite test, it has to be an invasive testing. Similarly, please don't repeat the same biochemical test in different labs. Say, suppose she's gotten a double marker test done in lab A, and that lab is giving you a high risk. There's no role to go and do a double marker in a second lab or a third lab or a fourth lab to see whether it will also give a high risk or it's going to give you a low risk. Say, suppose lab A gives high risk and lab B gives low risk. Which lab am I going to believe? There's no way I can decide which lab has done the test well, right? So if one of the biochemical tests is coming as intermediate risk or high risk, go for a better test. Again, NIPT or an invasive test. That is the hierarchy that we follow. Don't suggest lower efficacy tests after higher ones have already been done. If a double marker with an NT scan combined screening has been well done, and if it is low risk, no other tests need to be done. When she comes in the mid-trimester scan, you do your ultrasound markers, but you don't have to ask her to get a quadruple marker test. Triple marker is in fact outdated, so there's no role for that. So don't ask for quadruple or triple after a good double marker and combined screening has been done. Stick to that. Always reassure if it's only markers and suggest for what test needs to be done further. Don't scare the patient based on these markers. You know these are soft markers. They're very common in normal fetuses. Anicogenic intracardiac focus is so common. We see it on a day-to-day basis. Half the population, in fact, may have an ecogenic focus. In India, especially, it's a very common finding. Please don't scare the couple saying there is a dot in the heart. It could be Down syndrome. It could be mental retardation. Please don't do that. Just say that it is a tiny speck of calcium, a white dot in the heart. It's not a hole. It's not going to affect the heart in any other way. Function of the heart is good. You can turn the monitor, show her, the lady saying that, see, the blood flow is good. It's just a small white dot, which is just a very weak clue for Down syndrome. So, and that is why I'm telling you to do a next test to see whether that Down syndrome can be ruled out. Reassure the couple, make sure that they're not going away scared, because there have been any number of fetuses that have been aborted for an ecogenic focus, any number of fetuses aborted for a non-ossified nasal bone. You know, these are very common normal variants. Non-ossified nasal bone especially is a very common normal variant. So again, reassure the couple saying the nose is going to look normal. There's no problem for the baby to breathe or anything after birth. It is only that the bone inside is getting a little delayed in development. It is present. It is in cartilage form. It just needs to get calcium deposition to turn into bone. That can happen at any time. I'm not bothered. I just want to rule out Down syndrome, and that is why I'm asking you to get another test done. And once that test has come normal, say either an NIPT that gives low risk or an invasive testing that rules out Down syndrome, either a regular karyotype or a chromosomal microarray, a FISH you can do, a QFPCR you can do on amniotic fluid or chorion villus sampling if it is in the first trimester. Once Down syndrome is ruled out, I'm no longer even bothered about the nasal bone. If she comes back to me at 24 weeks or in the later 28 weeks, I'm not going to even look at the nasal bone to see whether it has ossified or not, what is the length at that day. That also I'm going to tell her. If you get your NIPT done and if it is low risk, or if you get your invasive testing done and it says no Down syndrome, forget about the nasal bone. There's no role for looking at it in your future scans. And that again, you need to remember in your practice. If a lady comes to you at 24 weeks or 28 weeks, she's got a marker done previously. Her previous scan says there was an unossified nasal bone in the 20 weeks. See what has been done for it. Has there been an NIPT or an invasive test? If that's been done and Down syndrome is ruled out, forget about the nasal bone. Don't look at it in the scan. If nothing has been done, then also you don't need to look at it and say that you are not reopening the chapter of aneuploidy screening since there was a strong marker already and a test was already suggested. You are not going to change that in your current scan. I always mention that just because she's come to me today at 24 weeks and say, suppose actually the ossification is normal or the length is normal, I'm not going to erase the importance of that unossified nasal bone earlier. It was supposed to be ossified then, it wasn't. So even today, if it is ossified, I'm not going to rule out the possibility of Downs just because that marker is negative for me today. So that's how you interpret and report. Please make sure that you're following that for all patients uniformly. Coming the last few do's and don'ts, Doppler do's and don'ts. Only use Doppler when it is clinically indicated or would provide additional information. There's no role of doing routine umbilical artery, MCA, ductus venosus, uterines in every single scan from the 20 weeks itself. No. If the growth is normal, we know that the blood flow Doppler has to be normal. Please don't touch the Doppler button at all. If she's coming to you in the last term gestation, beyond 32 to 33, 34 weeks, then okay. Even if the growth is normal, you can look at Dopplers to rule out certain late forms of growth restriction, late IUGR. So, but otherwise, no role for routine Dopplers, especially in the first trimester. Dating scan, less than 10 weeks. Please don't put on the color Doppler or the spectral Doppler waveform to look at the FHR. FHR you can measure by using M mode alone, and that is more than enough. Why am I saying this? Because the fetus is extremely tiny at that age. If you add on color Doppler, power Doppler, and pulse wave Doppler, you're going to be adding a lot of thermal energy into a tiny fetus. The thermal index, mechanical index in your machines will exponentially go up. That's not good before 10 weeks. So contraindication of all of these, spectral Doppler, color Doppler, power Doppler, before 10 weeks. Use only M mode. After 10 weeks in your NT scan period, you can use your pulse wave Doppler, especially to look at the tricuspid regurgitation and ductus venosus. You can use your color Doppler and power Doppler. Find the vessel first and then put on the color Doppler. If you're looking at the intracranium, you want to see the MCA Doppler at 35 weeks or 36 weeks. Get your section correct. Orient your probe so that you know where the MCA comes. You know your anatomical landmarks. You know where the circle of Willis is. Go down to the base of the skull. Just come up a little beyond the base of the skull cephalad. You know that's where the circle of Willis is going to be. You can even see the pulsation on grayscale alone. Orient your probe so that the middle cerebral artery comes as vertical as possible. Then only press the button for color Doppler. Until you get this section, until you see that the fetus is still, don't even try and put on your color Doppler. I've seen people where they'll be scanning the entire baby, the whole baby is seen, the head will be that small, and then you put on your color Doppler and you start trying to search for the MCA with your color Doppler on. No, the baby is going to keep jumping around. Get a nice zoomed image. Always optimize your images well. You have nice real estate on your screen. Use that screen space to get nice zoomed in images. Take your region of interest. 2/3 of the screen space should be occupied by your region of interest. Once you have your region of interest, then only put on the color Doppler. Immediately the MCA is going to light up. Then you can put on your spectral gate, sample volume gate, and get your waveforms. Please don't keep hunting around with the Doppler on. That's going to increase the time. It's going to increase the thermal energy. Your thermal index, mechanical index will keep going up. Always adjust your color gain, PRF scale settings, and the TGC controls to optimize the image. If your Doppler fill is not good in any of these vessels, manipulate these factors first. Try not to increase the power of the machine. It's very easy to just keep going up on the power, put 100% power so that the vessels fill fully, but that's going to increase the TI and MI again. Keep your power as less as possible, but increase the PRF, reduce the PRF, increase the color gain, adjust the time gain TGC controls to get your filling well. Keep the power as less as possible. Wait for the fetus to stay still. There should not be any fetal breathing movements before you take Doppler waveforms in the 3rd trimester, especially. So if there are fetal breathing movements, you're not going to get uniform graphs. You're going to get PI values all over the place. MCA Doppler is going to be all over the place. Ductus venosus especially, you're going to get very deep A naders if the fetus is breathing. So if the fetus is moving and breathing, just wait. Wait for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, ask her to walk around and come back. When the fetus is still quiescent, then only you're going to get good Doppler measurements. Watch the TI and MI on your screens. On the top of your screens, usually the MI and TI indices are um, denoted over here like this. TIS is thermal index soft tissue, TIB is thermal index bone, and mechanical index. All of these parameters should be visible on your screen for any scan, and all of these should be less than 1. That is the allowed limit for any ultrasound scan. ALARA principle, as low as reasonably allowable. So please keep these indices less than 1. If you're seeing that it's going above 1, reduce your power and adjust your other settings. Don't do routine fetal Doppler before 28 weeks. There's no role for color Doppler, power Doppler, or pulse wave Doppler less than 10 weeks to measure the FHR especially. And there's no role for continuous spectral Doppler longer than 10 seconds. You're not getting good uniform waveforms in the umbilical artery. There's breathing movements, or MCA is not giving you uniform measurements. Wait, take off the Doppler, wait for a couple of minutes, and put on the Doppler again. Don't continuously keep waiting for these waveforms to get regular. That's not correct. It's going to increase the thermal index. No role for souvenir scans. A lot of ladies come, they may be coming every 1 week, every 2 weeks to follow up on growth or any other anomaly. And every time they'll be like, ma'am, can I hear the heart? Can you make me listen to the heart? It's our job to tell them that there's no point in putting on the pulse wave Doppler just to listen to the heart. You can show the monitor to her. She can see the heart beating in real life on grayscale. There's no role to just put on the Doppler just for the sake of hearing the heart, especially when the fetus is very small. NT scan, they want to hear the heart.